Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. The Ouija board warned us about an accident. We didn't believe it until it happened. Alright, so before I get into the wild stuff, let me just say I'm not really the paranormal type. Ghosts, Ouija boards, all that stuff. I always thought it was just stories people told to scare each other. Fun at sleepovers when you're like 12. But I swear on everything, after what happened a few weeks ago, I'll never touch a Ouija board again. Ever. So, here's how it started. It was a Friday night, and me and my friends, Josh and Sarah, were hanging out at Sarah's place. We'd planned to do the usual, pizza, a couple of beers, maybe watch some cheesy horror movies. But Sarah, being the let's do something weird type, had other ideas. So I found this Ouija board in the attic the other day, Sarah said, out of nowhere, while we were halfway through a terrible B-movie about killer dolls. Josh laughed immediately. He's the biggest skeptic I know, always making fun of anything remotely supernatural. Yeah, okay, and let me guess, it's cursed or some crap, he joked, rolling his eyes. No, seriously, Sarah said, pulling out this old, beat-up box from under the coffee table. The thing looked ancient, like it had been sitting in some forgotten corner for years. The cardboard was yellowing, and the letters on it were so faded you could barely make out the words, Mystifying Oracle. I wasn't super into the idea, but it wasn't like we had anything better to do. Plus, part of me thought it could be kind of fun. You know, something to laugh about later. I didn't actually believe anything would happen. So, Sarah sets it up on the table, and we gather around like we're kids again. The planchette, that little piece you're supposed to move around, felt cold in my hand. That should have been my first clue, but honestly, I brushed it off. Okay, so how does this work again? Josh asked, half sarcastic but clearly curious. We ask questions, and it's supposed to answer us, Sarah said, all serious. But we can't take our fingers off the planchette. And, oh, we have to say goodbye at the end, or... She trailed off dramatically. Or what? The spirits get mad, I joked, trying to keep it light. Honestly, the whole thing felt a little silly at that point. We all placed our fingers on the planchette. Sarah dimmed the lights, because, of course, you need mood for this kind of thing, right? The air felt a little heavier, but I just figured it was the change in lighting messing with my head. Sarah started the whole thing. Is there anyone here who wants to talk to us? She asked in that cheesy seance voice you always hear in movies. Josh snickered, but we waited. Nothing happened. The planchette didn't move. We sat there for a good couple of minutes, feeling like idiots. See? Told you, this stuff doesn't work, Josh said, clearly bored. But then, just as we were about to give up, the planchette moved. I thought one of them was messing with me at first, so I gave them a look, but Sarah's face was dead serious. Josh was wide-eyed too, which freaked me out because Josh never takes anything seriously. The planchette slid over to yes. We all stared at each other, and Sarah, always the brave one, asked, "Who are we talking to?" There was a long pause. Nothing moved for what felt like forever, and then, slowly, the planchette started moving again. It spelled out a name, Elias. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We didn't know any Elias. No one I knew did anyway. "Do you have a message for us?" Sarah asked, her voice a little shaky now. The planchette flew over to yes again, and then it started moving faster, spelling out ACCIDENT. I pulled my hand away at that point. It was too freaky. Josh was trying to laugh it off, saying something like, "It's probably just Sarah pushing it around." But Sarah swore up and down that she wasn't doing anything. She even stood up and backed away from the table to prove it. That's when things started getting even weirder. As soon as she stepped back, The planchette jerked hard, like someone was yanking it. I swear none of us were touching it, but it kept moving. It spelled out Danger. Josh stood up and flipped the lights back on, laughing nervously. "All right, game's over. This is too much," he said, trying to shake off whatever weirdness was in the air. But Sarah was pale, like ghost white. I don't think I'd ever seen her that scared before. She looked at me, eyes wide, and whispered, "We didn't say goodbye." I didn't know what to do at that point. Part of me wanted to just forget the whole thing happened, but another part of me, something felt off, like really off. I could feel this weird, heavy tension in the room, like we weren't alone anymore. Josh laughed it off, but when I looked at the board again, the planchette was still. Too still. I reached down to grab it, figuring I'd just throw the thing back in the box and call it a night. But as soon as I touched it, I swear to you, I heard this faint scratching sound, like someone was trying to write something, but from inside the walls. That's when I knew something wasn't right. We should have said goodbye, and we should have listened to the warning. After that night, things got weird fast. Like, I'm talking the kind of weird that keeps you awake at 3 a.m., staring at your ceiling, wondering if you've completely lost it. We didn't really talk much about the Ouija board for a few days. Josh brushed the whole thing off, said it was just group paranoia. I wanted to believe him. I really did. It's a lot easier to think we all just freaked ourselves out rather than accept something else might have happened. But deep down, I could feel something had changed. It all started with little things. The next day, Sarah texted me saying her room felt off, like colder than the rest of the house, even with the windows closed. She said she couldn't sleep the night before because she kept hearing this faint tapping noise coming from the attic above her. I told her to chill out, that it was probably just some old house creaking or pipes shifting. You know, the usual stuff you'd say to calm someone down. But between you and me, I didn't believe it either, especially after what happened to me that night. I live in a small apartment downtown. My building's old, sure, but it's not one of those places where things randomly fall apart or make weird noises. So when I started hearing that same faint scratching, like nails dragging across wood, from behind the walls, I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. It wasn't loud, more like a subtle, distant noise that you'd think you could ignore. But here's the thing. It moved. The sound didn't stay in one spot. It'd start near my kitchen, then slowly travel down the hall toward my bedroom. I'd stop what I was doing and listen, trying to convince myself it was mice or something, but it didn't sound like that. It wasn't skittering or random. It was deliberate, like someone was slowly dragging their hand along the walls, searching for something. I stayed up most of that night, just staring at the ceiling, waiting for the noise to stop. Eventually, around 3 a.m., it did. But that heavy feeling from Sarah's house, it followed me. You know that sensation, like someone standing just behind you, but when you turn around, there's no one there. Yeah, that, constantly. A couple days later, Josh called me, sounding more freaked out than I'd ever heard him. And this is the guy who's never scared. He told me he'd been driving home from work the night before, and as he pulled into his driveway, his car just died. No warning. Nothing. The headlights flickered, and the engine cut off like someone yanked the plug. He checked everything. Gas, battery, whatever. All fine. The car should have been working, but it wasn't. Then he said, "You're not going to believe this, but when I looked up into my rearview mirror, I saw someone standing in the middle of the street, just staring at my car. I blinked, and they were gone. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, but it didn't feel like that. I don't know, man. It freaked me out. I didn't want to connect it to the Ouija board. None of us did. But it was getting harder to ignore. These little things, odd noises, flickering lights, weird glitches with our electronics, were piling up. Sarah called me a few days later and said she found scratches on the inside of her bedroom window. Not the outside, the inside. like someone had been clawing at it from within. At that point, I was genuinely freaked out. I hadn't even told them about the scratching in my walls, or how my bathroom mirror had started fogging up even when the shower wasn't running. There were handprints on the glass too. But here's the thing. They weren't the size of my hand, or anyone's I knew. We decided to meet up again, just to talk it out. Sarah suggested we go back to her place, maybe look at the Ouija board one last time, but that idea felt like the worst thing we could do. Josh and I were on the same page about that. No way were we touching that board again. It wasn't a game anymore. When we got to Sarah's house, though, something was different. She was quieter than usual, jumpy even. I'd never seen her like that. Normally she was the tough one, the one who'd laugh at this kind of stuff. But now, she looked scared. She kept glancing over her shoulder, like she was expecting someone, or something. "Are you okay?" I asked her as we sat down. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't. After a few minutes of awkward silence, she finally admitted what had been happening. "I've been seeing things," she whispered. "Shadows mostly. But they don't feel like normal shadows, you know. They move, but not when the light changes. And sometimes I think I hear whispering, but I can never make out what it's saying." Josh looked at me, and I could tell from his face he was finally starting to take this seriously. We all were. We needed to figure out what was going on, but more than that, we needed it to stop. I pulled out my phone, half jokingly searching for ways to end a Ouija session that went wrong. Yeah, apparently, that's a thing. There were stories online, people saying if you didn't close the session properly, you could let something in. And that something? It didn't leave until you made it. We were idiots. We didn't say goodbye. That night, after I got back home, the scratching in my walls came back. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was right next to me, like it was just behind the drywall in my bedroom. I pressed my ear to the wall, stupidly trying to figure out what it was. And that's when I heard it. The whisper. Faint, but clear enough. It said one word: accident. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back from the wall, my heart racing, trying to convince myself I was hearing things. Maybe I hadn't slept enough. Maybe I was stressed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. Whatever we had let in was still here, and it wasn't done with us yet. After the night, I heard the whisper. I didn't sleep. Not a single minute. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to come up, like somehow daylight would magically fix everything. Spoiler, it didn't. The next morning, I called Josh and Sarah, telling them what I heard. Sarah, who had been trying to act tough the last few days, went quiet. Dead quiet. Then she said, "It's not just you." Apparently that same night, Sarah had seen something in her room. She woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of that same damn scratching coming from her window. When she got up to check, she saw something outside, someone, actually, standing in her backyard. Just standing there, watching. "At first I thought it was some creep," she said, her voice shaky. "But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't right. It wasn't even looking at me. It was looking at the house, like it was waiting for something. I blinked, and it was gone." Josh chimed in then, saying he hadn't seen or heard anything the night before, but he did have a dream. A weird, vivid one that felt too real to just be in his head. "I was in my car," he said slowly, like he was still trying to make sense of it, driving down this empty road. The sky was dark, no stars, no moon, just pitch black. And then I see this thing in the road. At first it looked like a person, but when I got closer, I realized it wasn't. Its face was all wrong, like smeared or distorted, and it was staring at me. I tried to swerve, but the car wouldn't move. It was like I was stuck on a track, headed straight for it. He paused, and I could tell the memory of the dream was shaking him more than he wanted to admit. And right before I hit it, I woke up, Josh finished. But when I got up to grab some water, my car alarm was going off, for no reason. It stopped as soon as I stepped outside, but it felt, I don't know, like something was watching me. I could feel it. There was no denying it anymore. This wasn't just some random coincidence or us freaking ourselves out over nothing. It was connected, all of it. The scratching, the whispers, the dreams. Whatever we had called during that Ouija session was still messing with us, and it was getting worse. We needed to do something about it, and fast. Sarah suggested we try to find someone who could help, like a medium or whatever. Honestly, I didn't know if I believed in that stuff, but after everything that had happened, I was willing to try anything. So, we did what any desperate group of 20-somethings would do. We turned to the internet. It took a while, but we finally found a woman named Claire who claimed to be a medium. Her website was full of testimonials from people who swore up and down that she had helped them with spiritual disturbances, which sounded close enough to what we were dealing with. We emailed her, and she got back to us the next day, saying she could come by Sarah's house that evening. When Claire showed up, she was exactly what you'd expect from someone who deals with the paranormal. Late 40s, long greying hair, and these intense eyes that made you feel like she could see straight through you. She walked into Sarah's house without a word and just stood there for a second, eyes closed, like she was feeling the air or something. "You've been in contact with something," Claire said, her voice low. "Something that's trying to send you a message." I felt a chill go down my spine. This was real. Way too real. Sarah, being the brave one, asked the question we were all thinking. "What does it want?" Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked around the room slowly, her hand hovering over the walls, like she was following some invisible trail. She stopped near the window where Sarah had heard the scratching. "There's something here. It's tied to this spot," Claire said softly. "Whatever you summoned didn't come alone. There's more than one presence here." That's when I noticed it. The air in the room had gotten colder. I could see my breath fogging up in front of me, and Sarah's face had gone pale. Josh, who had been holding it together pretty well up until now, was gripping the arm of the couch so hard his knuckles were white. Claire turned to us, her expression serious. "You didn't close the session. That's why they're still here. They're trying to warn you, but they're also feeding off your fear." I could feel my heart racing in my chest. "Warn us about what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Claire didn't look at me when she answered. "About something that's going to happen, something bad." The word accident flashed through my mind again, and I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't want to ask the next question, but I had to. "Can we stop it?" Claire finally turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine. "You can try. But they're not easy to control once they've been let in. They'll keep trying to reach you, to give you the warning. But if you don't listen..." She trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. We all exchanged nervous glances, and Claire told us we needed to finish what we started. We had to go back to the board, reopen the session, and properly say goodbye. And we had to do it soon, before things escalated. That night, we set up the board again. None of us wanted to touch it, but we didn't have a choice. Claire told us to sit around the table, just like we had before, and focus. She said we needed to be calm, to show the spirits that we weren't afraid. But let me tell you, sitting there in that freezing room, hearing nothing but the faint scratching from the window, I was terrified. Sarah started the session this time, her voice shaking but steady enough. "Is there anyone here with us?" The planchette moved immediately. I could feel it under my fingers, pulling us to yes. Josh muttered something under his breath, but I was too focused to ask what. Claire nodded for Sarah to continue. "What do you want to tell us?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The planchette started to move again, this time faster, jerking under our hands as it spelled out ACCIDENT. My stomach twisted into knots. There it was again. That damn word. When? Sarah asked, her voice shaking now. When is it going to happen? The planchette froze for a moment and then slowly moved to spell Tonight. I yanked my hands away from the board, my heart racing. Tonight? What the hell did that mean? What was going to happen tonight? But before any of us could react, the planchette jerked one last time, sliding to goodbye on its own. The lights flickered, and the cold air in the room seemed to lift just like that. It was over. Or at least, it should have been. But the warning? It still hung in the air like a bad smell. Something was coming. We didn't know what or how, but we knew one thing for sure. We were running out of time. After the Ouija board gave us that final, bone-chilling message, none of us knew what to do. Tonight. That word echoed in my head like a ticking clock. We tried to act normal, but the fear was thick in the air, like we were all just waiting for something to happen. Claire left soon after the session, but before she did, she pulled Sarah aside and whispered something to her. I didn't catch what it was, but when Sarah came back into the room, she looked rattled. More rattled than I'd ever seen her. I wanted to ask what Claire had said, but it didn't feel like the right time. We were all too on edge, waiting for whatever was coming. The three of us stayed at Sarah's place, figuring it was safer if we were together. Or maybe we just didn't want to be alone in case the accident was something bad. Really bad. We sat around in her living room, the TV on low, trying to distract ourselves with mindless shows, but nobody was paying attention. Every little noise made us jump. Pipes creaking, wind tapping at the windows, even the soft hum of the fridge. Around 10 p.m, the power went out. 1 second, the lights were on, and then, without warning, the entire house was plunged into darkness. No flicker, no warning, just dark. The only light was coming from Sarah's phone on the coffee table, casting weird shadows across the walls. What the hell? Josh muttered, his voice strained. He got up to check the fuse box, but before he could take 2 steps, we heard it. A long, drawn-out scraping sound. It came from above us, somewhere in the attic. Sarah shot me a look, her face pale in the dim light. That's where I found the board, she whispered. I didn't want to say it, but I knew we were all thinking the same thing. Whatever we'd let in, it was still here. And now, it wasn't just messing with us. It was getting closer. Josh grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. I'll check it out, he said, trying to sound braver than he probably felt. He took a deep breath and started toward the stairs. I wanted to stop him, but I didn't know what to say. What could I say? Hey, don't go up there, because the ghost we pissed off might be waiting for you. It sounded ridiculous, even in my head. Sarah and I stayed downstairs, our eyes glued to the staircase, listening to Josh's footsteps fade as he climbed into the attic. The scraping sound had stopped, leaving this awful, oppressive silence. Every second felt like an hour. I kept waiting for Josh to say something, anything, but the only thing we heard was more silence. Then there was a crash, a loud, bone-jarring crash, followed by Josh shouting, "Shit!" Sarah bolted up from the couch. "Josh!" No answer. We rushed upstairs, our phones lighting the way. By the time we reached the attic, Josh was standing in the middle of the room, breathing hard. He was staring at the floor, where a large wooden box had fallen from one of the shelves, spilling its contents across the dusty floor. The air smelled musty, like old wood and forgotten memories, but there was something else in the room now, a thick, heavy presence, like we weren't alone. "What happened?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I don't know," Josh said, still staring at the box. "It just fell. I didn't touch anything." Sarah walked over and knelt beside the box, picking through the scattered items. There wasn't much. Some old books, a couple of faded photographs, and at the bottom, something wrapped in a piece of cloth. She unwrapped it slowly, her hands trembling. It was an old mirror. The glass was cracked in several places, but But what caught my eye was the frame. It was intricately carved, with strange symbols that looked familiar. Too familiar. "That's the same symbol from the Ouija board," I whispered, pointing to the carvings. Sarah looked at me, her face pale as she realized it too. Josh backed away from the mirror, his face pale. "I don't like this. I don't like any of this." Just then, we heard it again. The scratching. But this time, it was loud. So loud it seemed to fill the entire house. It wasn't coming from the walls or the attic anymore. It was coming from everywhere, all at once. It was the sound of something, or someone, desperate, trying to get in. Or worse, trying to get out. We all froze. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the air in the room thick and hard to breathe. And then we heard a voice. Not a whisper this time, but a voice. A deep, raspy voice that echoed through the room like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "Leave!" Sarah dropped the mirror and stumbled back, her hands shaking. The glass shattered as it hit the floor, and I swear, for a split second, I saw something in the reflection before it broke. Something dark, standing right behind us, watching. None of us said a word. We didn't need to. We bolted down the stairs and out the front door, leaving everything behind. The cold night air hit us hard, but it was nothing compared to the fear gripping my chest. I could still hear the voice in my head. "Leave." We stood outside, huddled together, catching our breath. Josh was shaking, his eyes darting back to the house like he expected something to come charging out after us. Sarah was pale, her hands clutched tightly around her phone. What do we do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer. None of us did. Whatever was in that house, it didn't want us there. But it wasn't just the house, was it? We'd unleashed something bigger than any of us could understand, and now it was with us, following us. As we stood there in the street, the wind picking up around us, I glanced down at my phone. I had an unread message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. No name, no contact, just one word: accident. That's when the car came. Out of nowhere, headlights appeared at the end of the street, barreling toward us at full speed. It was too fast, way too fast for a neighborhood like this. The engine roared, the tires screeching as the car swerved dangerously close to the sidewalk. I grabbed Sarah and Josh and pulled them out of the way just in time. The car flew past us, missing us by inches, and then it was gone, disappearing down the street as quickly as it had come. We were left standing there, hearts pounding, trying to process what just happened. That was it, Sarah stammered, her voice shaking. That was the accident. But I wasn't so sure. Because as I looked down the street where the car had disappeared, I realized something. There was no sound, no fading engine, no squealing tires, nothing. It wasn't the accident we'd avoided. It was still coming. We stood there in stunned silence after the car sped by, our hearts still racing, trying to process what had just happened. But something felt wrong. You know that feeling when something brushes past you so close you can feel the air move? That's what it felt like when the car almost hit us, but the second it disappeared, everything went still. Dead quiet. The kind of quiet that creeps under your skin. Josh looked down the street, his face twisted in confusion. Did anyone else hear that? He asked, his voice shaking. Hear what? Sarah snapped, her nerves clearly frayed. The car? Of course we... No, Josh interrupted. After the car. He was right. There was no engine noise. No fading sound of tires screeching in the distance. It was like the car had vanished the second it passed us. I glanced around, and the neighborhood looked completely normal. No headlights, no distant roar of an engine. Nothing. It was as if the car had never been there in the first place. A chill ran down my spine, and I knew right then that we hadn't escaped anything. We were still in the middle of it. It's not over, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Sarah's eyes flicked to mine, wide and filled with panic. What do you mean it's not over? We avoided the accident, right? We did everything we were supposed to. I shook my head. I don't think that was it. I think it's still coming. Before anyone could respond, my phone buzzed again. The screen lit up, and there it was, another message from that same unknown number. This time, it was longer. You didn't listen. The accident is coming. You can't escape it. I showed the message to Josh and Sarah. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, and Josh, usually the most skeptical, just stared at it like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "We have to leave," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to get out of here." "Where?" Josh snapped, frustration and fear finally getting the best of him. "Where the hell are we supposed to go? It said we can't escape it. No matter what we do, it's coming." I didn't want to admit it, but he was right. Every instinct I had was screaming to run, but where could we go? The thing we'd summoned, the thing that had been haunting us for days, it wasn't tied to one place. It wasn't just Sarah's house. It was with us, all of us. Everywhere we went, it followed. That's when the phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, from my number. But here's the thing. I hadn't sent anything. My phone hadn't been in my hands. When I opened it, my heart sank. It's too late. The words glowed on the screen, staring back at me like a death sentence. I showed it to the others, and we all just stood there, frozen in place. I don't know how long we stood like that, but every second felt heavier, like the air was pressing down on us, like something was closing in. Then, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind us. Slow, deliberate footsteps. We turned in unison, and that's when we saw it. At first, it looked like a person, a figure standing at the far end of the street, barely visible in the dim light from the street lamps. But as it stepped closer, I could tell something was off. Its shape was all wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its face, I don't even know how to describe it. Blurred, like someone had smeared its features with charcoal, leaving nothing but shadows where its eyes and mouth should be. We backed away, instinctively moving towards Sarah's front porch, our eyes locked on the figure as it slowly advanced. Each step was deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. And then, it stopped. Right in front of us. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The air around it felt thick with tension, like it was daring us to make the next move. I couldn't look away from its face, or what should have been its face. It was like staring into a void, an empty space where something terrible waited just beneath the surface. Sarah gasped, breaking the silence. "It's the accident," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's the accident." Without warning, the streetlights began flickering violently, casting the figure's shadow in long, jagged shapes across the pavement. The air buzzed with static, the same hum we'd felt when we first used the Ouija board. But now it was louder, more intense, like the air itself was vibrating. My phone buzzed again. It's here. Before I could react, the figure lunged forward, its shadow stretching toward us like black tendrils. Everything happened so fast. Sarah screamed, Josh shouted something, but I couldn't move. My legs were frozen in place, locked in fear. The shadow wrapped around us, pulling us toward the figure like we were being swallowed whole. And then, everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke up, I was lying on the pavement, the cold biting into my skin. The street was quiet again, eerily so. No flickering lights, no figure, no shadow. Sarah and Josh were still there, groaning as they slowly pulled themselves up. We were alive, somehow, but something was wrong. Josh was the first to speak. "Where's Sarah's house?" I blinked, trying to clear my head. I turned, expecting to see her house behind us, but it wasn't there. The entire block was gone. Instead, we were standing in the middle of a different street, one I didn't recognize. It was completely empty, no houses, no cars, just a long stretch of road disappearing into the fog. What the hell? Sarah muttered, looking around in confusion. That's when I saw it. In the distance, down the foggy road, was the car. The same one from earlier. This time, it was parked, its headlights glaring at us like a pair of eyes watching our every move. My phone buzzed one last time. It's not over. We stared at the message in silence, dread sinking into the pit of my stomach. The car's engine roared to life, its headlights flickering. Slowly, it began to move toward us, and this time, I knew. We weren't going to get out of its way. I used a Ouija board alone. It said it wouldn't leave until I let it in. Look, I'm not the type to believe in ghosts, spirits, or any of that paranormal crap. I'm just not. I've always been the logical one in my group of friends. While they were out watching those ghost hunting shows or messing around with tarot cards, I'd be sitting there rolling my eyes, sipping a beer, and waiting for the punchline. But I guess we all have that moment where we do something we know we shouldn't. For me, that moment came a couple of weeks ago. It started off pretty innocently, like these things usually do. I was bored on a Saturday night, nothing going on. My friends were all busy, and I had just finished binge-watching some dumb Netflix series that I couldn't even remember the name of. So, I was sitting there, scrolling through Reddit, mindlessly clicking through conspiracy theories and true horror stories, when I stumbled across a thread about Ouija boards. Now, I've always thought Ouija boards were kinda lame. You know, the usual. A group of kids sitting in a dark room, freaking each other out, while someone definitely pushes the planchette around to spell out some creepy message. But then I came across this one comment that grabbed my attention. It was from some guy who claimed that using a Ouija board alone was way more dangerous than doing it with a group. Something about it being easier for whatever's on the other side to focus on just you. That sounded spooky, but also kinda cool. And, like an idiot, I thought, why not? I had nothing better to do, and as I mentioned, I don't believe in this stuff. So I figured I'd do it as a joke, film it for my friends, and laugh about it later. Just me, a homemade Ouija board, because I wasn't about to spend money on this nonsense, and my phone to record the whole thing. I set up everything on the floor of my living room, turned off most of the lights for effect, you know, gotta make it spooky for the video, and drew a rough Ouija board on a piece of cardboard with a marker. I grabbed a shot glass to use as the planchette. If anything, I was more worried about how dumb this was going to look on camera than any actual danger. I sat there for a moment, just looking at the board. It was silent in my apartment. Too silent. I live in a small place, so there's always some noise. The fridge humming, cars outside, neighbours walking around. But that night, it was weirdly dead. I shook it off. My mind was just playing tricks on me because of the atmosphere I'd set up. With my phone propped up to record, I put my fingers on the shot glass and took a deep breath. All right, let's get this over with, I mumbled to myself. The usual spiel came to mind. Is there anyone here with me? I asked, in the most sarcastic voice I could muster. Nothing. The glass didn't move. Duh. I asked again, is there a spirit here? Come on, let's make this entertaining. Still nothing. I rolled my eyes. This was exactly what I expected. All right, cool. Guess that's that. I went to take my fingers off the glass when I felt it. The tiniest nudge. No, like really tiny. I almost didn't notice it. It felt like a twitch. The kind of thing where your brain tells you that maybe it's just your hands shaking a bit. But I knew my hands weren't shaking. They were steady. That nudge had come from the glass itself. I froze. My eyes flicked down to the shot glass, and I waited. I'm not sure what I was expecting. Maybe I thought if I stared long enough, I could catch some rational explanation. But then, slowly, and I mean slowly, the glass began to slide. It moved an inch, maybe two, before stopping. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and I had this moment of, what the hell am I doing? But at the same time, my curiosity got the better of me. I mean, something was happening, right? I swallowed hard and asked, who are you? I waited. This time, The glass didn't hesitate. It started moving more smoothly, like whatever was guiding it had gotten the hang of controlling it. It slid to the letters one by one, N, O, and then T. Not, I said out loud. Not what? The glass moved again. F, R, I, E, N, D. I stared at the board. Not friend. All right, that's sufficiently creepy, I thought. I was still convinced it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe some weird muscle spasm moving the glass. But the tension in the room had changed. It felt heavy, like the air was pressing down on me, thick and suffocating. The silence was louder now, if that makes sense. It was like the entire world outside my apartment had just ceased to exist. I tried to shake it off. If you're not a friend, what are you? I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The glass moved again, this time quicker. W, A, T, C, H. I frowned. Watch? I asked. What does that mean? The planchette stopped moving. Dead still. For a full minute, I sat there, just staring at the shot glass, waiting for it to do something, anything. But it didn't move. All right, this is dumb, I thought, ready to end the whole thing. Just as I was about to lift my fingers off the glass, my phone, the one recording me, vibrated. I jumped, my heart skipping a beat. It was a text from an unknown number. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the shot glass as I glanced at the screen. The message was short, but my blood turned to ice as I read it. Don't stop. It's not done yet. My heart felt like it had stopped for a second. I stared at the message, blinking, like maybe I had misread it. Or maybe it was some stupid prank. But I hadn't told anyone I was doing this. No one even knew I was messing with a Ouija board tonight. And this was a completely random number. No name, no context. Just those 6 words. Don't stop. It's not done yet. I should have quit right there. I should have put the board away, turned off my phone and called it a night. But you know that feeling you get when you're standing at the edge of a cliff? That weird urge to look over even though you know it's dangerous. That's what it felt like. Some part of me was telling me to stop, but the other part, the curious part, was telling me to keep going. I hesitated, looking at the phone again, then back to the board. I wasn't scared, not really. Not yet. Just freaked out. My brain was scrambling for some kind of rational explanation. Maybe someone had hacked my phone or something. I mean, that made more sense than a random text from a spirit, right? I took a deep breath and asked, "What do you mean, watch?" Watch what? The glass didn't move. I waited, fingers still resting lightly on the shot glass, eyes glued to the board. Silence. The room was so still, it was like even the air had stopped moving. I could feel this cold, prickling sensation creeping up the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I told myself it was just my nerves, that this whole thing was just some elaborate mind game I was playing on myself. But then, as I was about to ask another question, the glass slid across the board with more force than before. L, E, T. I leaned in closer, squinting at the letters. I, T. Let it. That was all it spelled before stopping again. I stared at the board, my mind racing. Let it. Let what? My gut told me I didn't want to know the answer. I was about to ask when my phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. It's outside. I froze. I mean, every single muscle in my body just locked up. For a second, I couldn't even move. I glanced toward the window. The blinds were shut, but now I had this overwhelming urge to peek through them. My apartment is on the 2nd floor, so logically there shouldn't be anything outside. Maybe a cat or something, at most. But the way that message was worded, it felt wrong. Like whatever it was talking about wasn't normal. Against every instinct in my body, I got up, walked to the window, and pulled the blinds open just a crack, enough to peek through. At first, I didn't see anything. The street was empty, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. Nothing moved, no cars, no people, just the faint hum of the city in the distance. I was about to step away when I saw it. There was something standing on the sidewalk across the street. No, not standing, more like crouching. It was hunched over, its back to me, so I couldn't see its face. It looked wrong, though. I don't even know how to describe it. It was tall, too tall for a person, but its limbs were thin, almost skeletal. Its arms were long, hanging awkwardly at its sides, and its head. I couldn't make sense of its head. It looked like it was tilted at an unnatural angle, like it wasn't attached right. My stomach twisted as I watched it. I told myself it was a trick of the light, some shadow or weird reflection. But then, it moved. It didn't stand up, didn't turn around. It just kind of twitched, like it was struggling to move, its body jerking awkwardly. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest, and for a second, I thought it might have been some glitch in my brain. You know how sometimes your eyes play tricks on you when you're tired? But no, this was real. It was too real. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my hand again. Another message. Let it in. I stumbled back from the window, my hand shaking as I stared at the screen. Let it in? Hell no, absolutely not. Whatever that thing was outside, I wasn't about to let it in. I sat back down at the board, panic starting to set in. "What are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. I didn't know who or what I was talking to. Was it the thing outside? Was it something else? I had no clue anymore. The glass moved, faster this time, almost aggressive. S-O-O-N. I swallowed hard. Soon what? I asked, my voice shaking. The glass stopped, and then it started to spell out another word. But this time it felt different. Like whatever was controlling it was in a hurry, almost impatient. I-N. In. In where? Just as the glass stopped, I heard it. A knock. It was soft at first, like someone lightly tapping their fingers against my front door. My heart practically leaped out of my chest. I stared at the door, my brain screaming at me not to answer it. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The knocking stopped for a second. I thought, maybe it's just my neighbour. But then it came again. Louder this time, more insistent. Another message came through on my phone. Let it in. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just knocking anymore. Whatever was outside, it was waiting. And the worst part, I realised the text messages weren't coming from my phone service. They were coming from inside my apartment. I don't know how long I sat there, just staring at my phone, trying to process the fact that the texts weren't coming from some random number. They were coming from inside my apartment. My mind was scrambling for answers, but nothing made sense. The silence around me felt thicker than before, like the room itself was pressing in on me. The knocking had stopped, but that didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made the whole situation worse. I kept my eyes fixed on the door. My apartment isn't big, so the front door was only a few feet away from where I sat. The chain lock was on, but in that moment, I couldn't remember if I deadbolted it. My heart was racing, and I could feel cold sweat beading on the back of my neck. I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was outside, I wasn't about to let it in. Another vibration. Another text. It's here. I squeezed the phone in my hand so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and uneven, as I forced myself to glance at the screen. That was all the text said. Just those two words. No explanation, no warning. Just, it's here. Before I could even react, the knocking came again. This time it wasn't soft. It was hard, angry. Like someone, or something, wasn't just knocking anymore. It was pounding. Each hit rattled the door in its frame, and I could hear the chain rattling like it wouldn't hold much longer. Stop, I whispered under my breath, as if saying it out loud would make it go away. Please, just stop. But it didn't stop. The banging continued, louder and louder, until it felt like my whole apartment was shaking. I forced myself to stand up, knees weak, and backed away from the door slowly. I didn't want to take my eyes off it, but the feeling of being watched from all sides was suffocating. Then, as quickly as it started, the banging stopped. The silence that followed was worse, way worse. I stood there, frozen in the middle of my living room, not daring to move. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look at it, but I knew I had to. With trembling hands, I raised it to my face. This time, the message was different. It's inside now. I blinked. Number. That couldn't be right. I hadn't heard the door open. The chain was still on, wasn't it? But when I turned to look at the door, my stomach dropped. The door was still closed, but the chain, it was dangling, limp, unhooked. I didn't unhook it. I backed away, my eyes darting around the apartment. There was no way it was inside. I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps, no creak of the door, nothing. But my gut told me that logic didn't matter anymore. Whatever was happening wasn't playing by any rules I understood. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, almost suffocating. My apartment wasn't big enough for anyone to hide. It was a small one-bedroom, open layout. But as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something in here with me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, watching, waiting. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, so fast I could see my breath in front of me. The hair on my arms stood on end, and that prickling sensation, the one from earlier when I thought something was behind me, was back, stronger this time. I slowly turned, scanning the room. My eyes landed on the Ouija board, still sitting on the floor, the shot glass resting dead center. For a second, I thought about running, just bolting out of my apartment and leaving everything behind. But then, a voice in my head, quiet at first, but unmistakable, whispered, "It's too late." I don't know why I did it, but I crouched back down in front of the board. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't stop myself. Something was pulling me back. I placed my fingers on the shot glass again, almost like it was out of my control. I could feel the cold glass under my fingertips, the tension in the air growing thicker by the second. I didn't even ask a question this time. The glass started moving on its own, faster and more erratic than before, like whatever was controlling it was desperate now. It slid violently across the board, spelling out something I didn't want to see. N-O-W. Now I swallowed hard. "Now what?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. The glass moved again, faster. L-E-T-M-E-I-N. Let me in. I ripped my hands away from the glass like it was burning me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. The room felt darker, colder, like the shadows were closing in on me from every corner. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Another buzz from my phone. I didn't want to look, but I had to. My fingers fumbled as I unlocked the screen. The message was short, but it felt like a punch to the gut. "You already did." My blood ran cold. I looked around, my eyes scanning every corner of the room, every shadow, every inch of space where something could be hiding. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what that message meant. I hadn't let anything in. I hadn't opened the door. But the voice in my head was louder now, and I could hear it, whispering again. "You let it in the moment you started." Suddenly, I heard it. A faint, scratching noise. It was coming from the corner of the room, near the window. My heart jumped into my throat. The scratching was subtle at first, almost like the sound of nails on wood, but it grew louder and more frantic, like something was trying to claw its way inside. But I didn't know what or where it was coming from. I turned toward the noise, but before I could take a step, it stopped. Dead silence again. But this time, it felt worse, like something was holding its breath, watching. Then, without warning, my bedroom door, closed just a second ago, creaked open. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. The darkness in my bedroom was thick, like a void, and for a second, I swore I saw something shift in the shadows. A shape. Tall. Too tall. The knocking hadn't been on my front door. It had been coming from inside my apartment the whole time. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, like every muscle had locked up at the sight of that door slowly creaking open. The shadows from my bedroom spilled into the hallway, thick and heavy, like something had sucked all the light out of the air. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the doorway. There was something standing in the darkness. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it. Tall, too tall for any person, with limbs that didn't bend the way they should. The figure shifted slightly, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It wasn't coming toward me, not yet. It was just there, lingering, like it was waiting for me to make the next move. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up in my hand, and for a second, I debated whether or not to even look at it. But my curiosity, or maybe my fear, got the better of me. I glanced down, and this time, the message wasn't like the others. It likes to watch. My throat went dry. My eyes flicked back to the doorway, my mind racing. It likes to watch. Was that all it was doing? Just watching me? I didn't want to find out. I needed to get out of the apartment. Now I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the figure in the shadows. It hadn't moved, but the tension in the air was thick, like the moment before a storm hits. I took one step back, then another, trying to move as quietly as possible. Every part of me was screaming to run, but I knew if I ran, if I made any sudden moves, whatever that thing was, it would follow. As I backed away toward the front door, I reached out behind me to grab the handle. My hand shook as I fumbled with the lock, my eyes never leaving the figure in the bedroom doorway. I could feel the cool metal of the doorknob under my fingertips, and for a second, relief washed over me. But as soon as I started to turn the handle, the door wouldn't budge. It was stuck. I twisted it harder, yanking at the lock, but nothing happened. My panic was rising, and my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might explode. I glanced back at the door, and that's when I saw it. The chain. It was still unhooked, just like I'd left it. But the deadbolt, it was locked. I hadn't locked it. I knew I hadn't. I hadn't even touched it since this whole thing started. My stomach dropped. My mind was screaming at me that something wasn't right, that something was messing with me. I turned my eyes back toward the hallway. The figure hadn't moved, but I could feel its eyes, or whatever it had for eyes, on me, watching, waiting. I gave the door one more desperate yank, but it was no use. I wasn't getting out that way, not unless I wanted to take my eyes off whatever was in that room, and that was the last thing I wanted to do, so I did the only thing I could think of. I ran, not toward the front door, but toward the kitchen. My feet pounded against the floor as I bolted around the corner, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I grabbed the largest knife I could find from the drawer and backed myself into the corner of the kitchen, facing the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the knife. I could barely think, barely breathe. I stood there, knife in hand, staring at the hallway. I could still see the bedroom door from where I was standing, just barely. The shadows seemed to pulse, shifting ever so slightly, but the figure hadn't moved. Not yet. Another buzz from my phone. My nerves were shot, but I forced myself to look at the screen. This time, the message was short, simple, but it felt like a death sentence. You can't hide. I dropped the phone. My pulse was racing, every muscle in my body screaming at me to do something. But what was I supposed to do? Run. Fight. The thing hadn't even moved yet, but I knew it was just toying with me. It had been from the start. The air around me felt colder, heavier. And then, just as I thought it couldn't get worse, I heard it. That same scratching noise coming from the walls. It was faint at first, like something was dragging its nails along the plaster. But it got louder, more frantic, as if whatever was doing it was trying to tear its way through the walls. My stomach turned as I realized the scratching wasn't just coming from one direction. It was all around me. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor. It was everywhere, like the entire apartment was alive with that horrible sound. And then I heard it. A low, guttural whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Let me in." I felt a cold rush of fear wash over me. The voice wasn't coming from the walls. It wasn't coming from the shadows. It was coming from inside my head. I gripped the knife tighter, trying to block it out, but the whisper grew louder, more insistent. It felt like it was clawing at my mind, trying to tear its way inside. "Let me in," it repeated, over and over, like a broken record. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop. It wouldn't stop. I was shaking uncontrollably now, my back pressed against the cold tile of the kitchen floor, knife still in hand. My vision was blurring, and I could feel the walls closing in. The scratching, the whispering, it was all too much. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. Then, the shadows in the hallway shifted again. Slowly, impossibly, the figure began to move. It didn't walk. It didn't crawl. It just slid toward me, like it wasn't bound by the same rules as the rest of us. It moved in jerky, unnatural motions, its limbs twisting and contorting as it came closer, step by step. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I was trapped in my own fear, paralyzed as it drew closer. The shadows stretched out ahead of it, reaching for me, pulling me into their cold, suffocating embrace. I tried to hold the knife up, but it felt like dead weight in my hands. My arms wouldn't move. My body was shutting down, overwhelmed by the sheer terror of what was happening. "Let me in." The voice was louder now, drowning out every other sound. It was inside my head, inside my thoughts, inside me. I could feel it pushing against the edges of my mind, breaking down the walls, forcing its way in. The figure was almost at the kitchen now, just feet away. Its shape was becoming clearer, but I still couldn't make sense of it. Its body didn't seem solid, like it was made of shadow and smoke, shifting and changing with every step. Its face, if you could call it that, was a blur of darkness, no features, just an empty void where eyes and a mouth should be. But I didn't need to see its face to know what it wanted. It wanted me. The figure was inches away now, so close I could feel the cold radiating off of it. It didn't have a face, just that blank, shifting void where its features should have been. But somehow, I could feel it staring at me. I could feel it crawling into my mind, pressing against my thoughts, forcing itself deeper with every breath I took. My body felt like it was shutting down. My fingers were numb, the knife slipping from my hand and clattering uselessly onto the floor. I couldn't move. I couldn't fight. I was trapped, cornered in my own kitchen, staring into the darkness that was slowly swallowing me whole. "Let me in." The voice was no longer a whisper. It was booming inside my head, louder than my own thoughts, like it had taken over every part of me. It wasn't asking anymore. It was demanding. And as much as I wanted to resist, as much as I wanted to hold on to whatever little bit of control I had left, I knew I was losing the fight. The shadows stretched further, crawling across the floor, reaching for me with long, spindly fingers. They coiled around my legs, wrapping tighter and tighter, pulling me closer to that thing standing before me. I could feel the cold sinking into my skin, into my bones, as if it was trying to freeze me from the inside out. The scratching from the walls had grown so loud now, it was deafening, like thousands of claws tearing through the walls of my mind, trying to shred everything that made me me. And the voice, God, the voice, it wouldn't stop. It was everywhere. It was everything. "Let me in." I couldn't hold on any longer. The fear, the cold, the weight of the shadows. It was all too much. My mind was fracturing under the pressure. the edges of reality blurring as that thing continued to close the distance between us. I could feel myself slipping away, sinking into the darkness. I couldn't tell where my thoughts ended and its voice began. Then, I did the only thing I could think to do. "I won't let you in," I whispered, my voice barely audible, but it was enough. The figure stopped, its empty, shifting face staring down at me. For a brief second, the shadows seemed to recoil, as if they were surprised, confused by my resistance. I could feel a tiny sliver of hope flicker inside me. Maybe I could fight this. Maybe I could. But then, the figure moved again, faster this time. It lunged at me, its arms, if you could even call them arms, wrapping around my chest, my neck, pinning me to the cold tile floor. The cold was unbearable now, seeping into every cell in my body, freezing me from the inside out. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. The darkness pressed against my face, suffocating me. "Let me in." The voice was furious now, echoing through my mind with such force that I thought my skull might crack under the pressure. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a command, and I could feel it pushing harder, forcing its way into the last part of me that was still holding on. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, trying to fight it off, but I was slipping, falling deeper into the void. My thoughts were scattering, dissolving into the darkness. I couldn't remember what was real, what was happening, or why I had even started this stupid game in the first place. And then, just as I was about to give up, about to let it in, I heard something, a sound, faint, distant, but familiar. It was my phone. The buzzing cut through the noise, through the scratching, through the voice in my head. I opened my eyes, barely able to focus, and saw my phone lying on the floor beside me. The screen was lit up, vibrating with an incoming call. My heart pounded in my chest, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something that wasn't fear. It was a chance, a lifeline. With every bit of strength I had left, I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the screen. I didn't even care who was calling. I just knew I needed to answer it. As soon as my hand made contact with the phone, the shadows recoiled violently, like they'd been burned. The cold loosened its grip on me, and for a split second I could breathe again. I swiped the screen with shaky fingers and held the phone to my ear. "Hello?" My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. For a second, there was nothing but static on the other end. My heart sank. But then, I heard it. A voice. A real voice. A human voice. "Don't listen to it," the voice on the other end said, urgent and breathless. "Whatever it's telling you, don't let it in. You can't let it in." The figure jerked back, as if the words had physically hurt it. The shadows were shrinking now, retreating back toward the hallway. But I could feel it. Whatever it was still there, waiting, lurking just out of sight. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. There was a long pause, like whoever was on the other end was choosing their words carefully. Finally, they spoke. "I'm someone who made the same mistake." The cold dread that had just started to leave me came rushing back in. I looked around the room, but the figure was gone, the shadows receding back into the dark corners of my apartment. But I knew it wasn't over. Whatever I had let in, whatever I had started, it wasn't done with me yet. "It's going to come back," the voice said quietly. "It doesn't give up easily. It'll wait. And when it does come back, it'll be stronger. You need to find a way to stop it before it gets in completely." I wanted to ask how. How do I stop it? But the line went dead. Just static. I dropped the phone and stared at the dark hallway, my heart still pounding in my chest. The apartment was silent again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It was the kind that told me I wasn't alone. I looked at the Ouija board, still sitting on the floor in front of me. The shot glass hadn't moved since the last time it spelled out "let me in." But I knew better now. This wasn't just a game. It never was. I don't know how long I sat there, just staring into the shadows, waiting for the thing to come back. Maybe it would be tomorrow. Maybe it would be next week. But one thing was for sure, it wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. We asked the Ouija board about my missing sister. It told us she's not dead, but she's not alive either. So, I'm not one to post stuff like this usually. Honestly, I never thought I'd be the guy writing some creepy story online, but I don't know where else to go with this. I need to get it out. Maybe some of you have experienced something similar. Or maybe you can help me figure out what the hell is going on. Okay, so to start off, my sister, Anna, went missing about 3 years ago. I remember the exact day it happened, which is weird because the days after are kind of a blur. It was June 3rd, 2021. I was in my room playing Call of Duty, as usual, and Anna, who was 19 at the time, told me she was going out with some friends. I didn't really pay much attention. It's not like I was her babysitter or anything. She was always going out, clubbing, hanging out at shady bars, meeting sketchy people. You know how some people just have that magnetism to trouble? That was Anna. Anyway, she didn't come home that night. At first, none of us thought much of it. She'd stay at a friend's place sometimes or crash at a guy's house if she was too drunk to make it back. It wasn't until 2 days later that my mum started to freak out. She'd been calling Anna non-stop, no response. Her friends hadn't heard from her either. By the end of the week, she was officially reported missing. No sign of her, no phone records, no bank activity. It's like she just vanished. Poof. Gone. The cops did what they could, I guess, but as time went on, it was like they just stopped caring. I mean, 19-year-old girl, probably just ran off with some dude, right? It was all speculation. But we knew. Anna wasn't the type to just leave. She loved our mum way too much to put her through that kind of pain. The weirdest part? Her car. It was found parked outside an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The windows were down, the doors unlocked. Nothing in it except her phone. No purse, no wallet, no sign of a struggle. It was like she just stepped out for a second and never came back. For 3 years, nothing. Not a word, not a clue. Just an empty space where Anna used to be. We had to learn how to live without her, which was impossible for my mum. But eventually life does this thing where it moves on whether you're ready or not. That's where things should have ended. But last month something happened that I can't explain. I'm not even sure if I want to try, but here we are. A few friends and I were hanging out, just messing around, when someone brought up the idea of using a Ouija board. You know, those dumb cardboard things you see in horror movies. I didn't really believe in that stuff, but hey, it was a slow night. Plus, we were a little buzzed, so why not, right? It's all fun and games until it isn't. I think it was Tommy's idea, actually. Tommy's the guy who always wants to push things a little further, just to see if something happens. He's the kind of guy who'll make you sneak into a graveyard at midnight, just for a laugh. So when he said, "Hey, let's ask the board about Anna," I should have known we were playing with fire. But like an idiot, I just went along with it. I mean, what could go wrong? It's not like a piece of cardboard could solve what the police couldn't. We all sat around the coffee table, lit a couple of candles to set the mood, Tommy's idea again, and pulled the Ouija board out of its dusty old box. I hadn't seen one in years, and even then, it was probably a cheap version someone got for Halloween. But this one, it was different. It had this weird old-school look to it, like it had seen things, like it had been used before. We each put our fingers on the planchette, and Tommy, of course, starts asking the usual questions. Is anyone here? Can you hear us? Blah, blah, blah. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. I was just about to call it quits when the planchette started moving, slowly at first, then picking up speed. At first, I thought it was Tommy. He's always pulling some prank, trying to get a rise out of people. But when I looked at him, he seemed just as freaked out as the rest of us. We all stared at each other, wide-eyed, like, is this really happening? Then Tommy asks the big one, Where is Anna? And I swear, my heart stopped when the planchette moved to the letter H. It spelled out, here. Here, I asked, my voice shaking. What do you mean here? It moved again, this time slower, almost like it was struggling to communicate. It spelled out, not dead. My stomach dropped. I was frozen, my fingers still lightly on the planchette, and I didn't dare to move them. Not dead? Then where is she? I blurted out, not really expecting an answer. That's when it spelled something that made the air in the room feel like it had been sucked out. Not alive. The planchette stopped moving. We all stared at each other, trying to process what the hell we just saw. Not dead, but not alive. What the hell does that even mean? I didn't know what to think. Maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe it was just some sick coincidence, or maybe, just maybe, something was actually answering us. But what really got to me was the next part. The board didn't just stop after that. No, it had one last message for us. One final chilling word before we all scrambled to end the session. It spelled SOON. After that night, things changed. Not in some dramatic movie-style way where doors started slamming and lights flickered. Nothing like that. But there was this feeling. You ever walk into a room and feel like you're being watched, even though no one's there? It was like that, constantly. Like the air was heavy, but only when I was alone. I tried to shake it off. I mean, come on, it was just a stupid Ouija board, right? Tommy probably moved the planchette himself just to screw with us. I convinced myself of that for days, telling myself it was nothing but a trick of the mind. But the problem was, even when I was with other people, the feeling didn't go away. I started noticing little things around the house too. My mum, bless her heart, was still in her zombie-like state, living day to day like a shell of herself. But even she seemed a little more on edge. She'd snap her head toward the hallway sometimes, staring at nothing, like she thought she heard something. Then there were the whispers, barely audible, like a faraway conversation, too low to make out. I thought it was the TV at first, but when I checked, the volume was muted. Then there was my dog, Max. He's an old, lazy golden retriever who spends most of his day sleeping by the window, too tired to care about anything. But for the past couple of weeks, he's been acting off. He'd stand at the bottom of the stairs, staring up into the darkness, like he was waiting for someone to come down. Sometimes he'd whine, other times he'd growl. A low, deep rumble that made my skin crawl. And the dreams. That's when I started losing it. The first one was the worst. In the dream, I was walking through the woods at night, my feet crunching over dead leaves. It was pitch black, but I could still somehow see everything. Trees, shadows, the path in front of me. And I knew somehow I wasn't alone. I could hear footsteps behind me, matching my pace, but no matter how fast I walked, they stayed with me. Then I saw her. Anna. She was standing in a clearing, just a few feet ahead, staring at me. She looked exactly the same as she did the night she disappeared. Same clothes, same messy hair. But something was off. Her eyes. They were wrong. They weren't sad or scared or anything like that. They were just empty, hollow. Anna? I called out to her, but she didn't answer. She just kept staring at me, like she was waiting for something. I started to walk toward her, but as soon as I took a step, she disappeared into the trees, vanishing like smoke. That's when the whispers started again, louder this time. I couldn't make out the words, but they sounded angry, desperate. I turned around to run, but suddenly, I wasn't in the woods anymore. I was in our living room. My living room. Anna was standing in the doorway, her back to me, her head cocked to the side like she was listening to something. I tried to call out to her again, but my voice was gone. All I could do was watch as she turned slowly, so slowly it made my skin crawl. And when I saw her face, I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. Her eyes weren't hollow anymore. They were black, completely black, like there was nothing behind them. And that's when I woke up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding out of my chest. That dream, it felt so real, too real. At first, I chalked it up to stress. I mean, I've been through a lot, right? Who wouldn't be having messed up dreams? But then I started having them more often. Not always the same, but always with her, always with Anna. One night, I dreamt I was sitting in my room playing video games when the power cut out. Total darkness. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, but it was dead. I don't know why, but I wasn't scared at first. I just sat there waiting for the lights to come back on. Then I heard it, a knock on my window. Now my bedroom's on the second floor, so no one should be knocking on my window. But there it was again, this soft, rhythmic knock, like someone was tapping their knuckles against the glass. I didn't want to look, but my body moved on its own, like I had no control. I walked over to the window and pulled back the curtain, and there she was, Anna, standing outside, her face inches from the glass. Her skin was pale, almost grey, and her eyes, those black, empty eyes, stared back at me. She smiled. And that's when I woke up, my heart racing, my hands shaking. I couldn't take it anymore. I started talking to my mum about Anna again, asking her if she believed Anna was still out there somewhere. I didn't mention the dreams. I didn't want to freak her out more than she already was, but I needed to know what she thought. Her answer, I feel her sometimes, in the house. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't expect that. I thought she'd brush it off, maybe tell me to stop worrying so much. But no, she believed it too. She could feel it. Her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up, pacing around my room, feeling that static in the air, like something was watching me, waiting. It wasn't until around 3 a.m. when I finally crashed. I don't even remember falling asleep, but I woke up to a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps, coming from the hallway just outside my room. I froze, listening. They stopped right outside my door. I stared at the crack under the door, waiting to see a shadow pass by. But nothing. Just silence. Then came the whisper. It was Anna's voice. I swear to God, it was her voice, but it sounded wrong. Like it was too far away. Like it wasn't coming from the hallway at all, but from inside my head. She said 3 words, clear as day. Come find me. And then, silence. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I couldn't. The next morning, I told Tommy and the others about what happened, about the dreams, the voice, everything. I didn't care if they thought I was losing it. I needed to get this off my chest. That's when Tommy dropped the bombshell. He'd been having dreams too. Not the same as mine, but close enough to make my skin crawl. We had to know more. We had to try again. And so, we did the dumbest thing we could have done. We pulled out the Ouija board one more time. I'll never forget the look on Tommy's face when we set the Ouija board back down on the table. The guy who always had a joke or a smirk was dead serious. That same old wooden board sat in front of us, its letters and numbers staring up like they were waiting, like it knew we were coming back. The group was smaller this time. Only me, Tommy and Katie, a girl I've known since high school. She was quiet, but not the shy type, more like the one who always knows more than she lets on. I hadn't wanted to drag anyone else into this, but Katie insisted. She said she'd been having weird dreams too, about Anna. And the thing is, she barely knew Anna. They met maybe twice, but now she was dreaming about her. That freaked me out more than I wanted to admit. We sat around the table again, just like before, except this time there was no alcohol, no joking around. We were sober, stone cold, and dead serious. Tommy lit a couple of candles. Real ones this time, not the dumb scented ones we'd used before. And we sat there, staring at the board, our fingers hovering over the planchette like it was some kind of loaded weapon. "Are we really doing this?" Katie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer right away. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to, but after what I'd been through, the dreams, the voice, the footsteps, I couldn't just walk away. I needed answers, and if this was the only way to get them, then so be it. Tommy was the first to break the silence. "We need to know what's going on, man. We can't just leave it like this." His voice was low, but there was a sharpness to it, like he was scared, but trying not to show it. We all placed our fingers on the planchette, and for a few seconds, none of us moved. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and the room felt colder than it should have. The candles flickered like there was a breeze, even though the windows were shut tight. Tommy spoke first. "Is there anyone here with us?" I held my breath, expecting nothing, hoping for nothing. But then, just like last time, the planchette started to move. Slow at first, almost like it was hesitant, and then it picked up speed, circling around before stopping on yes. I pulled my hand back, startled, but Tommy shot me a look and I put it back. He was trying to keep his cool, but I could see it in his eyes. He was just as freaked out as I was. Katie spoke next. "Who are we talking to?" The planchette moved again, gliding across the board, and spelled out something that sent a chill down my spine. ANNA. I stared at it, my throat tight, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. No way this was real. Tommy looked at me, eyes wide. "Is it really her?" he asked, though it was more like he was asking himself. I leaned in, my voice shaky. "Anna, is it really you?" For a few moments, nothing happened. The planchette stayed perfectly still, and I thought maybe the whole thing was over. Maybe this was just some sick coincidence. But then, it started to move again. SOON. Soon. That word again. What did it mean? Soon. What? Soon we'd find her. Soon we'd know the truth? Or worse, soon, something was coming. I swallowed hard and asked the question I'd been too afraid to ask before. "Anna, where are you?" The planchette moved quicker this time, like whatever was controlling it was more eager to answer. It spelled out one word, TRAPPED. Katie gasped, pulling her hand back, but Tommy and I kept our fingers on the board, too terrified to stop now. "Trapped," I whispered. "What do you mean, trapped?" The planchette moved again, spelling out something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. NOTDEADNOTALIVE. There it was again, not dead, not alive. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. This wasn't just some prank. This was something else, something darker, something I didn't understand. Tommy, his face pale, asked, "How do we find you?" This time, the answer came almost immediately, as if it was waiting for the question. SHEWILLSHOWYOU. "She," I repeated, my voice shaking. "Who will show us?" No answer. "Who is she?" I asked again, my voice louder this time. But the board stayed silent. I was about to call it quits when the candles flickered violently, almost going out, and the planchette jerked to life one last time. STOPLOOKING. That's when everything in the room changed. The temperature dropped, no, plummeted. The air felt thick, suffocating, like something was pressing down on us. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch, darkening, swallowing up the light from the candles. And then, just as quickly, it was over. The planchette stopped moving, and the room was still again. We sat there, breathing heavily, too scared to say anything. I could feel the weight of the words we'd just read, pressing down on me like 1,000 pounds. Stop looking. Was it a warning? A threat? Katie finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to stop. This isn't right. Something's wrong." I wanted to agree with her, to throw the board out and forget this ever happened. But I couldn't. Not after what I'd seen, what I'd heard. I needed to know more. Tommy was the first to move. He grabbed the planchette and tossed it back into the box, slamming the lid shut. "We're done," he said, his voice shaky. This was a mistake. But deep down, I knew we weren't done. Not by a long shot. The Ouija board wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was alone in my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was too quiet, the shadows too deep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was over. But I couldn't. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. The footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming down the hallway. They stopped outside my door, just like before. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Then came the whisper, so soft I almost missed it. "She's waiting." My blood ran cold. I sat up, staring at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I waited, listening, but the footsteps never came. The whisper never came back. But I knew deep down that whatever was going on, it wasn't over. It was just getting started. The days after that second Ouija session were the worst. I tried to keep things normal, act like everything was fine, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I kept hearing that whisper in my head. "She's waiting." It was like a constant hum in the background of my life now, always there, just quiet enough to make me question if I'd imagined it. The weird thing was, the house felt wrong. It's hard to explain. It wasn't just that uneasy feeling like someone was watching me anymore. It was more specific, like something was off, like there was something here that I wasn't seeing. The air felt thick, heavier in certain places, like there were spots in the house where it was hard to breathe, though nothing had changed. One night, about a week after the second session, I was sitting in the living room, flipping through channels, trying to distract myself. My mum had gone to bed early. She'd been doing that a lot lately. She wasn't sleeping well, always saying she felt like someone was moving around the house at night. I told her it was probably just me getting up for a glass of water or something, but the truth was, I wasn't the one making those noises. Anyway, I was sitting there, mindlessly watching some old sitcom reruns, when Max, my dog, started growling. He was lying by the front door, his head low, ears flat, eyes locked on something in the hallway. He wasn't one of those dogs that growled at everything, so when he did, it meant something was really off. I muted the TV, sitting up. "What's up, boy?" I whispered, more to comfort myself than him. But he didn't look at me. His eyes stayed focused on the hallway, his growl deepening, like he could see something I couldn't. I got up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and took a few cautious steps toward the hallway. That's when I noticed something strange. The hallway looked longer. I know that sounds crazy, but I swear, it didn't look right. It was like the walls had stretched, like the door at the end was farther away than it should have been. I rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of it, but the more I looked, the more wrong it felt. And then I saw it, a door. It was on the left side of the hallway, just past my sister's old room. The thing is, there shouldn't have been a door there. Our house isn't that big, and I've lived here my whole life. I knew every inch of it. There had never been a door there. I walked closer, my stomach churning. Max was still growling behind me, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to see it up close. The door was old, with peeling white paint, like it had been there forever, but no one had bothered to notice. There was no handle, just this rusted, brass keyhole. I reached out, my hand shaking, and ran my fingers over the surface of the door. It was cold, too cold, like the air around it was seeping into my skin. And then I did something really stupid. I knocked. At first, nothing happened. Silence. Just me and my racing heartbeat. But after a few seconds, I heard it. 3 slow knocks from the other side. I stumbled back, my heart leaping into my throat. My first instinct was to run, to get out of there, but something in me wouldn't let me move. I just stood there, staring at that door, my mind screaming at me to leave, but my feet rooted to the floor. And then, the door creaked open. Just a crack, not enough to see inside, but enough to send a cold gust of air rushing out into the hallway. It smelled damp, like mold and rot, and something else, something faint, like burnt hair. I gagged, covering my mouth, but I still couldn't move. It was like I was frozen in place, my eyes locked on that narrow opening. I was expecting something to come out of the door. Maybe Anna, maybe something worse, but nothing did. Just that awful cold air. And then, from inside the room, I heard her. "Come inside." It was Anna's voice, but it wasn't right. It was distorted, too slow, like a recording being played at half speed. My whole body went cold. There was no way that was her. But hearing her voice again after all this time, it did something to me. It pulled me in. "Come inside, please." The voice cracked on the last word, like she was crying. My heart broke, hearing that, even if I knew it couldn't really be her. Before I realized what I was doing, my hand reached for the door, slowly pushing it open. Inside was darkness. Not just your average dark. This was the kind of blackness that felt alive, like it was swallowing the light from the hallway. I couldn't see a thing. No furniture, no walls, nothing. Just an endless void. And yet, I felt like something was in there, watching, waiting. I took a step back, finally breaking free of whatever was holding me there. The second I did, the door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the hallway like a gunshot. I jumped, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear Max's barking now. He was at my feet, frantically scratching at my leg, like he was trying to pull me away. I ran back to the living room, slamming the door behind me, and sat there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. I felt like I was going insane. A door that didn't exist. A voice that sounded like my sister but wasn't. What the hell was happening to me? The next morning, I told my mum about the door, expecting her to laugh it off or tell me I was dreaming. But instead, she went pale. "There's no door in the hallway," she whispered. "There's never been a door there." I knew she'd say that. I knew it. But hearing her confirm it didn't make me feel any better. It just made it worse. I tried to forget about it, to convince myself it was all just some elaborate nightmare, but I couldn't. Every night, I heard the same sounds, the footsteps in the hallway, the knocking at my window, and then, always, that whisper, "She's waiting." I hadn't told Tommy or Katie about the door yet. I wasn't sure if I could handle them thinking I was losing it. But Tommy texted me that afternoon, saying he couldn't stop thinking about what the board had said, about she showing us. He wanted to meet up again, talk it over, maybe figure out what we were supposed to do next. I didn't want to tell him about the door. I didn't want to admit that I was starting to think the board was right, that something was trying to lead us somewhere, and that maybe, just maybe, Anna really was trapped, not dead, not alive. But as the days went on, I realized there was no turning back now. We were in too deep. Whatever was happening, we'd already opened the door. The only question left was, what's on the other side? I didn't want to, but I had to tell Tommy and Katie about the door. It didn't matter if they thought I was crazy. They needed to know what I saw. I needed them to understand that whatever we were messing with wasn't just some game anymore. We were way past that. We met at Tommy's place this time. I didn't want to go back to my house, not after what I'd seen. The door was always in the back of my mind now, like a bad itch I couldn't scratch. I avoided the hallway as much as I could, but that didn't stop the feeling that it was still there, waiting for me. When I told them about the door, Tommy was dead silent, his eyes wide with disbelief. Katie, on the other hand, didn't look surprised at all. "I had a feeling," she said softly, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I've been dreaming about doors for the past few nights." That made my blood run cold. What kind of doors? I asked. She glanced at me, her eyes dark and tired, like she hadn't slept in days. Old ones, like the one you described. Sometimes I'm in a hallway that doesn't end, and there are doors on either side, but none of them open. Other times, I'm at your house, in the hallway, standing in front of a door that shouldn't be there, but I never go inside. That hit me harder than I expected. It was like whatever this thing was, it wasn't just messing with me anymore. It was spreading, seeping into our minds, dragging us deeper into something we couldn't understand. Tommy finally spoke up. So what do? We can't just sit around and let this thing mess with us. We have to do something, right? Katie looked at him, then at me. I think we have to go back. To the door. I froze. The idea of going back into that hallway, standing in front of that cursed door again. It made my stomach churn. But deep down, I knew she was right. I had opened something, and the only way to get answers, to end this, was to face it, head on. That night, we went back to my house. The second we walked in, the atmosphere felt different, heavier, colder, like the house itself knew what we were there to do. The shadows seemed to cling to the corners, darker than they should have been, and the hallway, it felt longer again, just like before. Max, my dog, refused to come with us. He stayed in the living room, whining softly, his tail between his legs. I didn't blame him. We stood in front of the door, the three of us silent, the only sound our breathing, shallow and nervous. The door looked the same as before, old and worn, with that rusted keyhole like it had been there for decades. But this time, it felt different, more alive, like it was waiting for us. I'm not sure about this, Tommy muttered, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped them on his jeans. What if we open it and something comes out? I couldn't answer him. I didn't know what was behind that door, but we didn't come this far just to back out now. Katie stepped forward, her face pale but determined. We have to. We don't have a choice. If we don't open it, this won't stop. She was right. Whatever was behind that door, it wasn't going to leave us alone. We'd brought it here, summoned it somehow, and now it was waiting for us to finish what we started. I reached out, my hand shaking, and grabbed the door's edge. For a second, I thought I heard something on the other side. Faint whispers, just out of earshot. I took a deep breath and pushed. The door swung open easily, revealing nothing but pitch-black darkness inside. No furniture, no walls, just that same endless void from before, swallowing the light from the hallway. It was deeper than anything I'd ever seen, like it didn't belong in this world. For a long moment, none of us moved. We just stared into the blackness, waiting for something to happen. I half expected Anna to step out, her black eyes staring back at me like in my dreams. But nothing came. Then, slowly, the whispers started. They were louder now, clearer, coming from deep inside the darkness. It wasn't just one voice, it was many, overlapping, like a crowd of people murmuring just below the surface. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it sent chills down my spine. Katie took a step forward, her eyes wide, like she was drawn to it. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "It's her. I know it's her." I grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Don't. We don't know what's in there." But before I could stop her, she yanked free and stepped into the darkness. The second she crossed the threshold, the air in the hallway seemed to shift, growing colder, more oppressive. I called out her name, but she didn't respond. She just kept walking, disappearing into the blackness until I couldn't see her anymore. "Katie!" Tommy shouted, but it was like the darkness swallowed his voice. I couldn't just leave her in there. I took a step toward the door, my heart racing, but the second my foot crossed the line into the room, everything changed. The hallway behind me vanished. Tommy was gone. I was standing in complete darkness, but I could still hear the whispers, louder now, surrounding me, pressing in from every direction. And then, over the noise, I heard it, the voice. "Come find me." It was Anna. I knew it. It was her voice, but it was wrong, too slow, too distorted. I turned, trying to find the source, but the darkness was thick, suffocating. I took another step forward, my hand outstretched, hoping to find something, anything. And then I felt it. Cold fingers wrapped around my wrist. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I tried to pull away, but the grip tightened, pulling me deeper into the blackness. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "Come find me," the voice repeated, closer now, the breath hot against my ear. And then I saw her, Anna. She was standing just ahead of me, barely visible in the dark. Her face was pale, her eyes black and empty, just like in my dreams. She was smiling, but it wasn't a smile I recognized. It was wrong, twisted. "Help me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, help me." I tried to reach out to her, but my body wouldn't move. The cold fingers still gripped my wrist, holding me in place. And then, in the darkness behind her, something else moved. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form shifting, writhing like it wasn't meant to be seen. It loomed over Anna, its shadow stretching out, swallowing her up. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stood there, smiling, that wrong, broken smile, as the darkness took her. And then, everything went black. I woke up on the floor of the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. Tommy was shaking me, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. The door was gone. The hallway was back to normal, and Katie was gone. We never found her. We never spoke of that night again. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I still hear the whispers. "Come find me." And I know deep down that door is still there, waiting.